money isn't everything.
That's what my boss says.
Does he?
That's right.
One thing my father taught me about business. Always do business as if the person you're doing business with is trying to screw you, because most likely they are. And if they're not, you can be pleasantly surprised.
I'm Chris Hill. Welcome to Money Unplugged. Thanks for checking out the show. Everyone's got a relationship with money, and that's what this conversation is about. The way it factors into our decision making, but also some fun stuff too, like splurging. Life is short, people. You got to splurge once in a while. Today on the show, Dan Pink, author of 5 New York Times bestsellers, including The Power of Regret and When, The Scientific Secrets of Perfect Timing. And we had a really good talk, me and Dan. He was very open and honest about financial anxieties at different points in his life. This is not a heavy conversation. We had some laughs at different points, especially towards the end. But as you're going to hear, Dan is transparent in a way that you might not expect. Now, I do have to tell you one thing about a decision I made with regard to this interview. I interviewed Dan at his home. When I got back to my home and listened to the audio, I realized I made a technical mistake when I was recording. The audio is fine, but it's not great. It's not the quality of last week's episode. So the decision I had to make was, do I keep this conversation with audio that's a little bit lower in quality, or do I go back to Dan, attempt to redo the entire interview again with better audio quality, but then I'd lose out on all of the moments that make this conversation, I think, really compelling. And I decided not to make that trade. I've interviewed Dan at least a half dozen times before this, and honestly, I'd never been so absorbed in the conversation like I was with this one. So bear with me on the audio quality, because I do think the conversation is worth it. So thanks for hanging in there. Let's get into it with Dan Pink. So let's start when you're a kid. Do you have an early sense of money when you're growing up?
I think so. And I think like many people, my early sense of money was that our family didn't have quite enough. There was always a sense of struggle. Not struggle in the sense of being evicted, not struggle in the sense of not having enough food to eat, but there was always a sense in my household that there wasn't quite enough to keep up, that there were always bills to be paid, that other people might go on vacation, but we're not really going to go on a real vacation, those kinds of things. So I think it's interesting because I think it's fairly representative that you can have a kid's relationship to money doesn't necessarily have to be dire to know. A kid can know that something is wrong without things being dire. So there's a big difference between my sense of that something was going wrong, something was off. There's a big difference between that and a kid going to sleep hungry, a kid not having a place to live. That was absolutely 100% not me. But there was always a sense that something's a little bit off. Like there's a lot of juggling going around here, that it's a source of stress in the household, that this is, problem.
This relates to something that Morgan Housel told me when I was talking with him, which is children's ability to pick up on what's happening. I'm paraphrasing, but he basically said, you don't need to teach your kids about money. Your kids are picking up cues all the time. And so I'm wondering, when you're growing up, obviously you don't have a sense of the family finances in terms of the actual numbers, but it sounds like it's just sort of the vibe in the household.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's a negative vibe. It's a vibe that says there's a problem here. It's a problem that isn't going to cause calamity right now, but it's kind of an omnipresent problem. It's sort of like if you live in a place like Seattle where it's raining all the time. It's like, oh, it's raining all the time. And so it's going to be damp year round.
This is just how it is here.
Exactly.
So I'm going to come back to that, but then let's move a little bit forward. Do you remember what your first job was as a kid?
I did mow lawns in my neighborhood, as many kids in the Midwest did. And I think that would be the first thing that I did that qualified as a job. I wasn't very enterprising. It was only a few lawns, but that's something that I did.
What were you charging back then?
God, I don't know. I was wondering about that. It probably only a few bucks.
moving forward, you go to college.
Yeah.
What did you study there?
I majored in linguistics.
And what did you think you were going to do with that?
I knew from a pretty early age, and this is partly money related, that I was going to go to law school. And the reason for that was that my parents always told me, in part, I think, because of this endless drizzle in the household, that you always need, and these are their words, but they're not really unique to them. They're very middle class words. They said, well, you need something to fall back on. And so with a law degree, you can do anything, but you need to have a profession. You need to do something where you can make a decent living, and you just can't go out willy-nilly and do whatever you want. You need something to fall back on. You can do whatever you want at some level, but you always need that safety net. They didn't use the word safety net. They always use the word something to fall back on. And that was, for me, for a kid who was, better at manipulating language than manipulating test tubes, that meant law school, not medical school.
Am I correct? There was a couple of years between when you graduate from college and when you go to law school?
Yeah.
What were you doing then?
I went to work here in Washington for a public interest group and, making at the time $12,000 a year. At some level, the background of this omnipresent concern about money, I think it did make me fairly conservative as an adult, especially when I had kids. In a weird way, it made me slightly less conservative as a young adult because I was just used to it, that it wasn't a surprise. It's like, oh, so this is how it works. It's like you're always like juggling bills. That's just what life is. Just as like you get a driver's license and you're able to drive a car when you become an adult or when you get further in your life, that juggling bills is what adults do.
Right. I'm interested in what your parents said to you because I think you're right. It is absolutely common, particularly when it comes to law school. And it's like, well, this gives you something to fall back on. And I'm curious, this was something I was thinking about recently. I find when I'm talking to friends and they say about one of their kids, oh, they're going to go to law school, my brain immediately goes in the same direction every time, which is an affirmative response, like, oh, that's great. And then I immediately skip past the actual school. I go straight to the job, not knowing necessarily what kind of law they're going to practice, because I just go straight to like, oh, well, that's a good decision because they're going to have a stable job at the end of the line. And I skip right past the school, which I've never been to law school. I imagine it's pretty demanding.
Yes, it is, but it's not. There are many things that are demanding. There are many jobs that are demanding. There are PhD programs are demanding. A design school is demanding. Medical school is demanding. All these things are demanding. The issue with law school, and it's not like people going to law school is the biggest problem that America has to deal with right now. But many people back into it. They don't dive into it. They back into it. I'm not sure what else to do, so I might as well do that. It'll keep my options open. And I think that's generally a pretty bad idea.
Why?
There are opportunity costs. It's 3 years of your life. That's a not insignificant amount of your life. And the other thing that happens that I've seen more and more is that people say, oh, I'm not sure what to do, so I might as well go to law school. Then they say, well, I'm not sure what to do out of law school, so I might as well work at a law firm for 2 years. And they say, well, I worked at a law firm for 2 years. I might as well work at a law firm for 3 more years. I've worked at a law firm for 3 years. I've worked at a law firm for 5 years now. Well, if I make it to become partner, then I'll have a lot of options. And so there are people out there who spend a large portion of their life keeping their options open.
Yeah, when you put it that way, it is kind of sad. But I do think it is. I don't know. In a weird way, I think that's unique to law school.
Could be because the thing is, you don't have to know anything to go to law school. It's not like medical school. Medical school, you have to have a certain curriculum that you have done very well in order to even be eligible to go. But that's not it. You also have to have some experience, maybe doing some research related to medicine. They always want you to shadow doctors. Whereas law school, you can say, hey, I don't have a job and I majored in history. Let me go get an LSAT prep book, take the LSAT and apply to law school.
Right. There is no college equivalent for law school as there is with medical school. It's organic chemistry. Yeah.
There's a required set of courses you must take in order to go to medical school. Whereas in law school, the only requirement is a college degree and a pulse.
Right. But I knew people, you probably knew people, they get to college, they think, I'm going to go to medical school. Then they take organic chemistry. And then it's like, oh, I'm not going to medical school.
Yeah. But and that's also part of how the process to get into medical school is designed. There are all kinds of hurdles and things along the way so that people who aren't truly committed drop out of the process. And so with law school, there's no friction. If there was an organic chemistry equivalent of law school, well, you have far fewer people going to law school. I think that if you had required to apply to law school, you had to show that you had shadowed 3 lawyers, that you had spent a couple of days with 3 different lawyers. I think that law school application would go way down.
I think that's probably right. And I'm thinking of one friend of mine in particular who completed law school, got a job at a law firm, and after a year quit altogether because she, and I'm quoting here, realized she didn't like conflict. I'm like, well, that seems like something you probably should have figured out sooner.
I mean, but if you shadowed a lawyer and realized that litigation is basically arguing with people all day long and often about very petty things, that might disabuse you of that. I mean, I truly had no idea what lawyers did. I mean, I'm an idiot. I went to law school. I went to law school having never visited a law school, having never sat in a law school class, having never talked to a lawyer about what he or she did.
So when you graduated from law school,
yeah.
Were you more open to that, or were you thinking, well, I've got this degree now, I can fall back on it, but I'm going to go do something?
So by then I was making slightly better decisions with my life. I also understood the sunk cost fallacy. Not fully, but a little bit. I understood the sunk cost fallacy somewhat. So I knew that I didn't want to practice law. And so I graduated from law school unemployed, which is an unusual thing at the top 20 law schools. Very few people graduate unemployed. But I graduated unemployed and went off to try to find a job. But again, at a certain point, so much of life is about choosing the pain or inconvenience that you want. So I could have had the certainty I could have gotten a job, I assume, and then I would have been miserable. And graduating law school unemployed I was not happy about that. It was a different kind of misery, but I think it was a lesser misery than the other misery. So you're choosing your misery. Yeah, I think that's right. This is the uplifting message I'm sure you're listening to, Chris. Choose your misery.
For all you kids out there.
I think there is something to be said for that is always asking yourself, compared to what question? So is this, am I unhappy? Is this a bad situation? Yeah. Compared to what? Compared to a worse situation? Well, maybe it's not so bad.
It's the Jerry Seinfeld line, choose the torture that you're comfortable.
Yeah, exactly. No, there's something to be said for that.
You mentioned your kids earlier. How did having kids change the way you think about money, or did it not change it at all?
Oh, it made me more conservative, more conscious, and more conscientious. No question. I guess there's three C's there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Conservative, conscious, and conscientious. No question about it.
Saving more?
When my wife got pregnant, first thing I wanted to do was get a car because we needed to have a car if we were going to have a baby.
Right.
So I got a used car. We didn't have a will of any kind until we had a kid. As soon as we had a kid, my God, we need a will because what if something happens and who's going to get the 48 cents in our bank account if we perish? Thinking in some ways, in a way that surprised me, thinking as a provider. One of my roles on this planet is to provide for people, which is something that even when I was married without kids, I don't think I thought about it that way. Because I think that my wife and I had comparable, I think she probably made more than I did when we both had jobs before we had kids.
Did you talk about money before you got married?
We didn't talk about it in some sense, not because we were bearing an important topic or because we were unsure about how to talk about it, but because it was clear from being together that we were operating a similar wavelength, that neither one of us was especially extravagant, that we thought about things in a very, very similar way.
We're in the same zone. Totally. In terms of how we spend and how...
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Coming up, more with Dan, but just for a second, can we talk about what's in your kitchen? If you're like me and enjoy a little spice with your food, you have to try Mar. I have tried a few different brands of chili garlic crunch, and Marmar is by far my favorite. It has amazing flavors, it's not too spicy, and it is so versatile. Breakfast tacos, pasta sauce, sandwiches, pizza. These are just a few of the ways that I use Marmar. And I'm going to be honest, it started as a specialty ingredient. I'd use it every once in a while, and it has quickly turned into a kitchen staple for me. It's like salt, pepper, Marmar. That's how often I use this stuff. I love it, and if you want to try it, good news, you can get 10% off your first purchase when you use the promo code MONEY at ilovemarmar.com. Click the link in the show notes or go to ilovemarmar.com and get 10% off by using the promo code MONEY. Your taste buds will thank you. All right, let's get back to Dan. When the kids get older,
Yeah.
is there a conscious sitting down and let me teach you about money, or was it something that, sort of happens by osmosis as you observe them interacting with money as they get to be teenagers?
I think here there is a divide in different parental approaches. Jessica, my wife, I think was willing to show, not tell, to role model it and not have explicit instruction. I, on the other hand, I don't even know I should admit this. I, on the other hand, had a somewhat different approach. One of our daughter, Eliza, decided that she wanted to have a lemonade stand. And I insisted that she actually buy the ingredients from us rather than just get the ingredients. Because, yeah.
How old was she?
She was probably 7.
Great.
So, because I thought that you got to think about this a little bit more directly. I started telling my kids about compounding interest from the time they were little. And then I also, when they got a little bit older, I gave them the capital versus labor explanation, something that I didn't know as a kid. And or even as a young adult, it's basically, you're much better off owning something than you are selling your labor. And, you have to sell your labor at some point, and that's okay. But just be conscious of there are limits of that. And so I had the capital versus labor. In other words, they didn't listen to me, but they did what my wife did.
How did the lemonade stand work out?
I don't remember. And I might have actually, I think there was some debt restructuring went on subsequently. It was really the principle of the thing that I wanted to demonstrate. I don't think that it stuck.
I like the idea of just a 7-year-old girl walking into a bank, applying for a small business loan, and they're like, "What is this for?" And it's like, "Look, lemonade stand. I need capital. These ingredients don't buy themselves.
Right.
Have you seen the price of sugar?"
Yeah.
Now that you are in the empty nester phase, how are you feeling about money? Are you feeling secure? Are you feeling more secure, but not 100%? My hunch is, and this is not necessarily based on what you told me about your childhood growing up, but really more about these types of conversations I've had with people just in everyday life about how, for most people, the way money is growing up just leaves an imprint on you that never fully goes away, for better or for worse. So what's your comfort level now?
It's interesting because I've reflected on that, and I'm generally skeptical about childhood influences, actually, in some ways.
Why?
And I just think that some of the research shows that parenting matters less than we think it does. But in this case, I actually think you're right, that it did have an effect on me. But to your question of where am I now, I'm feeling secure, but less secure than I should feel and less secure than I really am.
Do you think you'll ever get to that point?
No.
Neither do I.
You don't think I'm going to get to that point?
No, this is a question I thought about in my own life. And it's again, to go back to that,
I'm never going to be fully comfortable.
Find the torture that you're comfortable with.
Yeah.
I just thought, I think this is just always going to feel like this a little bit.
Yeah.
Because as we were talking before we started recording, particularly when you're a parent, but I think this certainly happens for plenty of people who are not parents. Life can be surprising. It often is surprising. And sometimes those surprises involve, oh, because of this, I now need to spend a lot of money. A tree falls on my house, a car accident, a health emergency. There's always going to be that stuff.
I'll see you and raise you. I was unwilling to make any kind of even modest professional change until I did a series of over the years, online Monte Carlo simulations using like this Monte Carlo simulating calculators. And I would only be satisfied by basically putting in essentially a pretty dire economy over the next 40 years and having to get to a 99% certainty of having enough money before I was even comfortable having a conversation about doing something different.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So that's risk averse. That's super risk averse. I mean, I can say that I can say that if someone else had told me that, it's like, wow, okay, so you are very, very conservative. Like you are over indexed on risk management. And I'm like, yep.
But I'm assuming that helps you sleep at night.
Yes. You can know things about economics and finance and then not follow them. Okay. So I'll give you an example. We were fortunate enough that we were doing well enough that we were able to pay off our mortgage fairly early. We paid off our house, relatively, the house we're sitting in right now, relatively early. We had a very low interest rate. It was a bad economic decision to do that. That money would have been better off deployed somewhere else. But you know what? I would be better off going upstairs at sleep at night knowing my house was paid off. So if something horrible happens, everybody gets to stay in this house.
All right, let's get to the speed round. What is something that you wish you knew earlier about money?
I'm going to sound like an idiot, but I truly did not know the difference between income and wealth until probably my late 30s. And there's a big difference.
Was there a trigger point that put that lesson in your head? Or it was you just, when you reflect on your life, you think, it was about my late 30s?
It wasn't a trigger point. It was more that I reflect on my life. It was also this idea, because I had decided to go out on my own around that time, the idea of constantly hustling to bring in income. And it's like, it's not like you do it once or 2 years, you do it every year. And I'm like, Then I look around and say, well, these people actually have some kind of wealth, whether it's an asset that they built, whether it's an asset that they've acquired, whatever, that is generating money for them. And it's like, and one of the things that I discovered was like, I said, God, you know what? Rich people don't work that much. I mean, I like working, and I couldn't want to continue to work, but it's like, gosh, some of these rich people don't work that much. And I think I figured out why.
Yeah.
So it took me 4 decades to get this.
What is a purchase that you've made that brings you happiness? I know they say money can't buy happiness, but I've found that, it kind of can.
I have in the basement of this house a very large wine refrigerator. It costs probably $1,700, which for me is a decent expense. And it holds maybe 130 bottles of wine. And because I like to drink wine, but I'm also a very, very price conscious wine consumer. I can give you some advice on that. Because with wine, there is not a necessary correlation between price and quality. And there are ways to get really good value in wine. And so I think what I like about that is that anytime I have a bottle of wine, it's either with my wife, with my family, with friends, or something like that. So to me, it brings me a certain level of joy and satisfaction, knowing that, hey, this is like a part of my life and a very sort of small indulgence that I have.
You're familiar with Nassim Taleb, who wrote The Black Swan.
Yeah.
So years ago when his book Anti-Fragile came out, I interviewed him about the book, and he's a very serious person, not particularly animated. And I was sitting across from him like I'm sitting across from you. And one of the things I learned about him in just preparing for the interview is that he is very much a wine enthusiast. The only point in the conversation where he got animated was at the very end, where I asked him a question about wine, and he literally was sort of bouncing in his seat and was basically, and I'm paraphrasing, but he basically said, never pay more than $20 for a bottle of wine.
There is something for all these credits. There is something to be said for that. It's like 20. Oh, well, maybe I don't know how long ago you talked to him, but maybe
A decade or so.
okay, yeah. So I mean, he's generally right. Like you should not spend a lot of money on wine, and there are other ways to get very, very good wine at very reasonable prices. In fact, I actually own the domain populistwine.com because I thought about doing something like basically saying, because the thing about wine is that sort of like there are things that I like as a consumer that it irritates me that they're somehow considered rarefied. One of them would be wine, which you should just drink the wine you want. Drink the wine you enjoy. There isn't a right answer, and you shouldn't pay a lot. It should just be a source of pleasure. And it's really interesting because every bottle of wine, there's a story behind it. There are people who made it and grew the grapes and so forth, and there's history behind it. And should just be a source of pleasure and not this kind of rarefied thing where you're searching for the right answer, have to come up with the fancy wine vocabulary. And the other one is museums. Museums are amazing, except that sometimes the way that they're configured are so rarefied, and the way that people go through them is so rarefied that it drains a lot of the pleasure out of it. So anyway, populistwine.com if anybody wants to buy it.
What is a purchase you've made at any point in your life that you regret and you still think about it now and then?
It's funny you say this because I thought about it 2 days ago so we're talking today 3 days ago. None of that matters. Something I thought about 3 days ago. We're talking on a Thursday. I thought about this on Monday because in my office back there's a kind of a closet. It's a way to conceal certain kinds of machinery and heating and cooling apparatus, but it also offers a little bit of storage space. And I saw in there a box for Google glasses.
Is it unopened?
No, unfortunately it's open. And what happened is this one friend of mine, when Google Glass was first coming out and they were scarce, was like, hey, if I can hook you up, I'm like, oh my God, I gotta do that. And it's like it might be the dumbest thing I've ever bought. I mean, I wore them for like 20 minutes, put them back in the box and haven't looked at them since, but they still sit in the box haunting me.
What is the last thing you splurged on for yourself, not for your wife or your kids or friends or anything like that?
Okay. So here again, fortunately, I can show you. And I'll show you this thing. And it's kind of pathetic.
You know this is an audio podcast though, right?
Yeah. But I'll show you, Chris, and you can describe it to your legions of viewers. So it's actually came in my email. I was reminded of it in my email this morning. I can show you on my phone right now. It's kind of pathetic, and I probably shouldn't admit this on a major podcast. And yet here I am. It's something I ordered from eBay earlier, and that is, I just got a notice it's going to be arriving. And maybe you can just read what it says there.
Vegas Golden Knights Zamboni bucket, popcorn bucket.
Yes.
So the NHL team had a promotional popcorn bucket, and it's
in the shape of a Zamboni.
Of their branded Zamboni.
Yeah. It's in the shape of a Zamboni, and you can like put popcorn or chips in it.
And you imagine,
it's awesome.
You imagine yourself, I'm assuming, in your basement, drinking wine.
Yes.
And
cheap wine.
Gorging yourself on popcorn or chips.
Eaten out of a Zamboni. Eaten out of a replica Zamboni.
You know what? That is the kind of thing you should splurge on.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And just to be clear here, like you can look at the price.
$27. That's a bargain. That's a bargain.
That's going to bring me. It brought me $28 of joy just telling you about it.
And once it arrives, you just amortize that over years. What is a charitable cause that you like to support?
There are a few. In our family, we're big supporters. We're very dedicated supporters of the ACLU because we think it's a bulwark in the face of some very negative forces in this country, holding them off for a moment. And then we also contribute to a fund at my alma mater, Northwestern University, that helps low-income Northwestern students make the transition, typically for smart kids who are in under-resourced high schools, make the transition into a very demanding college curriculum, but also get some support and mentorship along the way of the kind that middle-class kids always get from their parents.
That's great. Do you have a favorite movie or television show about money, or even?
You know what? I was actually for most of the season, not the last season, but I was a pretty dedicated watcher of Billions.
I've never seen Billions, and I'm a huge Paul Giamatti fan.
He's very good. I feel like that was so it was the name is in the title. It was a lot about money, but it was ultimately about power and ego. But money was often the representation of people's identity and their ego needs and their need for status. So I really enjoyed that. It's not, high literary television, but it always struck me as kind of like a telenovela for like an American telenovela. But I thought it was a really fun show.
I want to close with Penny, for your thoughts. It can be about money, but it doesn't have to be. It can be just some wisdom about life that you picked up along the way that you can share with anyone listening.
On anything?
On anything, including promotional popcorn buckets.
I guess the piece of wisdom, the thing that I wish I had, sometimes a way to analyze that, a way to think about that is to think about what you would have wished you knew earlier. And you asked a couple questions about that with regard to money. I guess a mistake that I made, and a mistake of attitude, a mistake of perception, conceptual mistake in a sense that I made early on was that I cared about what other people thought of me. And again, as I became an adult, maybe early 30s or something like that, I actually discovered what people thought about me, which is that they didn't think of me. Nobody gave a shit about me. They were thinking about themselves. And so it was an absolute waste of time for me to navigate my life in any small way by being concerned about what other people thought. And that was like a yoke off of me once I realized that. So don't compare yourself to other people. Don't care about what other people think. Do your thing.
There you go. If you haven't already read any of Dan's books, do yourself a favor, pick one out. He writes about business and motivation and creativity in such great ways. You can go to danpink.com or pretty much any bookstore anywhere. I'm Chris Hill. Thanks for listening. See you next week.